It's always darkest before the dawn in Black Hollow. The small town, nestled within a shadowed valley, is the kind of place most people pass through without a second thought. Surrounded by dense forests, cradled by mist that rolls in from the mountains, Black Hollow feels more like a forgotten corner of the world than an actual town. Its cobblestone streets, crooked buildings, and rusted street lamps tell stories of time slipping away. For years, it has been left alone, the kind of place no one bothers with. Until now. But there's something in the air when the moon begins to swell. Something thick and heavy, as if the very earth holds its breath. The locals know the signs. They've always known. It's the full moon. And with it, the terror begins again. When the moon rises high, something sinister stirs beneath the town, deep in the shadows. It's not a feeling anyone can quite explain, but you know it when you feel it, the weight of an ancient presence that watches, listens, waits. The town holds its breath as the night drags on, and by morning something or someone is always gone. Gone without a trace, without a whisper, leaving behind only the suffocating silence that settles like dust over the empty streets. The first time it happened, no one thought much of it. A traveler passing through, a woman with a child, had vanished overnight. The town searched the woods for days, combing through the fog that clung to the trees, but no one found a single clue, not even a footprint. And when they finally gave up, when the air grew thick with resignation, they found something by the river. Bones. The bones were not scattered, as you'd expect in such a place. They were arranged, perfectly, neatly, formed into strange, cryptic patterns that defied any logical explanation. Some of the town's oldest residents spoke of rituals, whispers of offerings made to an entity that had once ruled the land. But no one dared to speak these words aloud. It was easier to pretend that the fog had somehow stolen the woman and child, and that the bones were merely an animal's doing. But the disappearances didn't stop. Every month a new victim, and every time, without fail, the bones appeared by the river. As the years passed, the townsfolk tried to convince themselves that it was just coincidence, just nature's cruelty. Yet there was a nagging feeling that lingered, a cold, creeping sensation that settled deep in their bones. The kind of feeling you get when you're alone at night and you swear you're being watched, but when you look, no one's there. They tried to forget. They tried to move on. But no one ever left Black Hollow once the full moon arrived. Not without a price. One night, just before the moon reached its peak, a stranger came to town. His name was Samuel Keene, a detective from the city, sent to investigate the latest disappearance. The town was nervous. They had no need for outsiders, especially not ones with questions they didn't want answered. But the stranger's eyes, sharp, relentless, betrayed a man who was searching for something more than just a missing person. The moment Samuel stepped off the bus, the town went quiet. Conversations stopped. The shopkeepers eyed him warily, clutching their brooms as if they were weapons. No one smiled, not even the children. In the town's only inn, Samuel sat at a table with the mayor, a man named Clarence, whose face was worn like the skin of a weathered oak. The air between them was thick with the things left unsaid. "Don't waste your time," the mayor said, his voice low, a gravelly whisper that barely escaped his lips. He looked over his shoulder, his gaze darting nervously to the shadows that seemed to close in on the room. "This place is cursed. We've been telling you folks that for years, but you never listen." Samuel leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "I'm here to help," the mayor scoffed. "There's no helping Black Hollow. There hasn't been for a long time." But Samuel wasn't one to be easily deterred. His instincts told him that something more was at play here, something that lurked beneath the surface, something far older than the town itself, something that had been waiting, watching. As the night fell and the shadows lengthened, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that the town had been lying to him. The stories about the bones, they weren't just tales spun to keep the children in line. They were real, and so was the terror that followed them. The moon rose high, bathing the town in its sickly light. As Samuel walked down to the river's edge, he noticed something, an unnatural stillness. The wind had stopped. The The sounds of the night stifled under the weight of the impending horror. The river, once wild and restless, was eerily calm. The water seemed to hold its breath, just as the town had done for so long. And then he saw it. The bones, arranged in a perfect circle, their sharp edges glistening under the moonlight. They were arranged like a macabre offering, some kind of ritual, some kind of message. The hairs on the back of Samuel's neck stood on end as a chill swept through the air, sharp as ice. He didn't understand it yet, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. The river wasn't just a river. It was a marker, a boundary between the living and the dead. And as the moon rose higher, casting its silver glow over the bones, Samuel realized the truth. The bone collector wasn't just a myth. It was real, and it was coming for him. The town of Black Hollow had its secrets, and it had its price. Everyone who came there learned it sooner or later. The question was, would Samuel be the next one to pay? The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, like the closing of a door, and the bones, arranged by the river, seemed to whisper his name. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched closer to the circle of bones by the river. The air felt thick, as though the very atmosphere itself had grown heavier with the weight of the moon above him. His breath came in shallow, anxious gasps, the cold air biting his lungs. "Oh my God!" he whispered to himself, the reality of what he was seeing sinking in like a lead weight in his stomach. Each bone seemed to shimmer under the light of the full moon, a sickly glow that made them appear almost alive. The bones weren't just strewn carelessly. They were arranged deliberately, placed with intent. The sense of something ancient, something beyond comprehension, seemed to hum in the air around him. It was like the river itself had become a silent witness, waiting for him to understand the truth. Samuel swallowed hard, his mind racing. Why here? He reached forward instinctively, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the closest bone, feeling the cold touch of death that lingered. His mind flashed to the missing people, the townsfolk's warnings, the fearful glances exchanged when anyone even mentioned the bone collector. Suddenly, a sharp, high-pitched scream shattered the silence of the night. A woman, out of nowhere, appeared at the edge of the river, her eyes wide with terror. Her hair was wild, her clothes torn as if she had been running for miles. She staggered toward Samuel, her face a mask of absolute horror. They're coming!" she screamed, her voice raw, frantic. "You don't understand, they will take you too. You have to leave." Her eyes were wide, unblinking, as if she were seeing something far beyond the moonlit scene. The air seemed to crackle with her terror. Samuel stood frozen, unable to speak, his mouth dry, his thoughts scattered. He knew that something terrible was happening, something beyond human comprehension. But the woman's words made the fear claw at him, deep inside. "They will take you too." Before he could react, she turned and ran, her feet pounding against the earth as she disappeared into the fog, her wild screams echoing through the woods. Samuel stood there, trembling, his gaze fixed on the dark river. His instincts screamed at him to turn and run, but something kept him rooted to the spot, something darker than fear itself pulling him closer to the bones. He stepped back cautiously, the air growing colder with each movement. Then it happened. A low, guttural growl sounded from deep within the forest, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. The hair on his neck stood on end as the growl turned into a deep, resonant hum, like the voice of something ancient and monstrous. It was as if the ground beneath his feet were alive, shifting with the energy of something that had been waiting for him to arrive. "Get out of here!" Samuel shouted, his voice trembling. "What the hell is happening?" He glanced around, but the woods seemed empty, too empty. The trees, their limbs twisted and gnarled, loomed like silent sentinels, watching him, waiting. Suddenly, the bones in the circle shifted, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if they were alive. A bone clicked against another and then another. Samuel gasped, his heart racing. "Dear God!" he breathed, stumbling backward as the smell of rot and decay filled the air. He had to move. He had to get away from this place. But as he turned to run, he heard something else. Something that made his blood run cold. A soft whisper, almost a chant. It seemed to come from all around him, yet from nowhere at all. Words in a language he couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Inhuman, ancient, and filled with a promise of death. "You are next." The voice echoed in his mind, sending a wave of nausea crashing over him. Samuel's eyes widened in disbelief, his body frozen in place as the blood drained from his face. He staggered backward, his hands shaking as he wiped the sweat from his brow. "No, no, no, no," he muttered under his breath. His mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to fight the grip of terror that was slowly suffocating him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a shadow impossibly large crossing the river. It was brief, but it was enough. A figure, cloaked in darkness, moved with unnatural speed. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. No, this can't be real. Without thinking, he bolted, running through the thick fog, his feet pounding against the ground, his breath coming in frantic gasps. He didn't care where he was going. He just had to get away from the river, away from the curse that seemed to be following him. His mind screamed at him to keep moving, but the sound of footsteps behind him, too close, made his heart lurch in his chest. No. He whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the fog, thick as a curtain, swallowing him whole. Suddenly, the world went silent. Not the comforting silence of the woods, but the suffocating, oppressive kind that felt like the air itself had been stolen. And then he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. The bones. The bones were whispering. Each bone seemed to emit a low, eerie hum, like a song being sung by something that had long since forgotten what it meant to be human. The bones moved again, but this time, it wasn't the river's current. It was the force of something otherworldly, something that shouldn't exist. They scraped against the ground, the sound grating against Samuel's sanity. A scream broke free from Samuel's lips, a raw, gut-wrenching scream, before he could stop it. He turned and ran faster, pushing his legs harder, but the fog seemed to close in around him. The trees became twisted shapes, their branches reaching like claws, their shadows stretching to claim him. Suddenly, he stumbled. His foot caught on something sharp, something that made him cry out in pain. He looked down, his hands, trembling with panic, gripped at the ground, searching. The fog parted just enough for him to see it. A bone. The bone was sticking out of the ground, jagged and sharp, like a warning. But as his hand closed around it, his vision blurred, his surroundings fading away, replaced with an overwhelming sense of dread. Someone was coming, and they were not alone. With each breath that Samuel took, the night grew darker, more oppressive. The tension in the air thickened. They're watching, he thought. They're watching me. But no matter how far he ran, no matter how desperately he fought, Samuel couldn't escape the truth that was written in the bones. The bone collector was real, and it was coming for him. Samuel's heart raced as he fought to regain control of his breath. The bone still clutched tightly in his hand. His pulse echoed in his ears, thumping like a drumbeat that matched the rhythm of his frantic escape. It's not real, he tried to convince himself, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his disbelief. This can't be happening. But as the fog thickened and the shadows stretched longer, he knew deep down that what was happening was far worse than anything he could imagine. The river was no longer just a boundary, it was a trap. And the bone collector? It wasn't some legend whispered among the fearful townsfolk. It was here, it was real, and it was closing in. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted. There was no warning, no sign. One moment, his feet were pounding the dirt, and the next, he felt the earth give way beneath him, as if the land itself had opened to swallow him whole. Ah, no! Samuel screamed, flailing in the air as he tumbled into the darkness, landing with a sickening thud. The pain shot up his spine like a jolt of lightning, but he barely had time to recover before something worse grabbed hold of him. A pull, a force that was beyond his understanding, beyond the realm of logic. It was like being dragged into the earth itself, the ground beneath him wet and cold. Samuel cried out, his fingers clawing desperately at the dirt, trying to stop himself from being sucked into the abyss. He had no idea where he was, but the darkness seemed to press in from all sides, suffocating him. The chill of the night now felt like ice against his skin. The hair on his arms stood on end as the oppressive quiet stretched on, except for the whispering. That awful, low murmur. The bones were still whispering. You cannot run. The words crept into his mind, as though spoken directly to him by some unseen entity. His blood turned to ice as his eyes scanned the void. It was impossible to see anything through the thick fog, but the sound of the bones calling him, dragging him into the depths, it was unmistakable. His whole body shook with the force of a panic he couldn't outrun. No and oh! He shouted, scrambling to his feet. His legs were shaky, unsteady as if the ground had been cursed beneath him, pulling him back. He tried to turn, but his body felt sluggish, almost as if it didn't belong to him anymore. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest rising and falling with the weight of sheer terror. And then he saw it. The shadow. It was massive, too large to be anything human. It emerged slowly from the fog, a dark silhouette that slithered and twisted through the mist with a low, guttural growl that sent a wave of ice through Samuel's veins. His breath caught in his throat. He could feel his pulse pounding against his temples, louder than the footsteps that followed him in the night. The figure's eyes, no, not eyes, glowing pits of darkness, like voids where light itself dared not go. They fixed on him, unmoving, unwavering. A flash of pale, brittle bone-like appendages emerged from the fog, stretching toward him with a terrifying slowness. Samuel staggered backward, his entire body frozen with dread. He could hardly breathe, hardly think. The world spun around him, a blur of shapes and sounds that made no sense. And then came the voice, or rather, the screams. They were not human. They were screams of people who had been taken long ago, lost souls trapped forever in the river, their agonizing cries echoing across time itself. Samuel's knees buckled under the weight of their torment, their pain seeping into his bones. He could feel them, feel their cold hands clawing at his chest, desperate to drag him down into the same fate. He couldn't escape. He couldn't. Suddenly, the whisper returned, this time louder, clearer, as if it were inside his head, in his very soul. You belong to the river now. The words seemed to shake him to his core, and in that moment, something inside Samuel broke. His will, his resolve, all of it shattered under the weight of those ancient words. He stumbled forward, his legs giving way beneath him as his mind finally grasped the horror surrounding him. The thing in the fog wasn't just a creature. It was a force, something older than the town itself, older than time. And it was hungry. Please, Samuel gasped, his voice cracking. Please, The shadow lunged. In an instant, the cold, bony fingers of the creature wrapped around his throat, squeezing with a vice-like grip. His breath was cut off, his vision going dark around the edges. His hands flew to his neck in a desperate attempt to break free, but it was futile. The creature's strength was overwhelming, unnatural. The whispers grew louder, like a chorus of thousands of voices crying out from beneath the earth. Samuel's world was swallowed by the dark. But just as he thought the end had come, a flash of white light cut through the mist. The creature recoiled. The grip around his throat loosened just enough for him to take a desperate, gasping breath. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. There, standing in the distance, was the woman from earlier, the one who had screamed. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, but in her hands, she held something. A torch. A flame that burned bright. A pure light in the midst of the darkness. With one final burst of strength, Samuel reached for the woman's light, using it as a lifeline, pulling himself free from the creature's grasp. "Help me!" he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. The shadow was closing in again, relentless. The woman didn't hesitate. She grabbed Samuel's hand, pulling him toward her with strength that shouldn't have been possible. She cast another glance over her shoulder, her eyes filled with fear, before she dragged him into the safety of the trees, away from the river, away from the horrors that had nearly claimed him. But even as they ran, Samuel could hear it. The bones. The whispers. The bone collector had marked him, and nothing would stop it from coming for him again. Samuel stumbled through the fog, his mind reeling. The woman's grip on his arm was strong, her breath ragged in the air, but her pace never faltered. She knew these woods. She had been here before. As they pushed through the thick trees, Samuel tried to focus, to think through the haze of panic, but his thoughts kept slipping through his fingers like water. His heart hammered in his chest, still caught in the rhythm of terror. He could still hear the whispering in his mind, feel the cold presence that had nearly torn him apart. "You belong to the river now," the voice repeated, over and over, like a twisted lullaby. It haunted him, clawed at his soul. Who are you?" Samuel finally gasped, his voice barely a whisper. The woman didn't answer immediately, only pulling him faster through the woods, her eyes darting around nervously, as though she were expecting something to jump from the shadows at any moment. The fog seemed to thicken with every step they took, wrapping around them like a living thing. Samuel's breath came in shallow gasps, the cold biting at his skin, but his thoughts were still focused on her, on the woman who had saved him. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, hoarse, almost trembling with the weight of the words she was about to say. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice carrying a tremor. "None of us should be here." Samuel's brow furrowed, confusion and dread mixing in his chest. "What are you talking about? What was that thing? What's happening in this town?" His voice rose, panic seeping into every syllable. She paused in her step and turned to him, her face pale and haggard, as though she had lived through this nightmare far longer than she should have. Her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time he saw the depth of the terror in them, the kind of fear that wasn't just for the moment, but for the soul itself. "It's the river," she whispered. "It's always been the river. The bone collector. It's more than just a creature. It's the hollow itself. And it's calling for you." Samuel felt his blood run cold. "What does that mean?" he demanded, his voice trembling. She shook her head, her eyes darkening. "The bone collector isn't just some spirit, some ghost. It's the embodiment of the hollow's curse, a force that has existed here long before any of us came. Every full moon it claims a soul. Every time the river runs red, it adds another to its collection." Her voice cracked with the weight of the truth she had been hiding for so long. "And once it marks you, there's no escape." Samuel stepped back, the terror rising again like a wave threatening to drown him. No, I won't let it take me." But the woman's gaze softened for a moment, a deep sorrow in her eyes. "It's not up to you. The hollow has already decided." She glanced over her shoulder, her face paling even further. "It's not just the river either. The land itself is cursed. The trees, the earth, the very air we breathe. It all belongs to it now." Samuel tried to steady his breathing, his thoughts racing. He had to understand. There had to be a way to stop this, to escape. He couldn't just die in this cursed town, dragged into the river by something ancient and terrible. But before he could speak again, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the woods. The woman's face paled further, her hand tightening on Samuel's arm as she pulled him forward. "We have to move. Now." They ran through the woods, the sounds of cracking branches and distant howls filling the air. Samuel's legs burned with exhaustion, but he didn't dare stop. The air was suffocating now, thick with an oppressive force that seemed to weigh them down. The woman didn't look back, but Samuel could see the fear in her eyes. She was trying to outrun something that had been chasing her for far too long. "Where are we going?" Samuel gasped. His voice was hoarse, raw from panic. "To the church," she answered, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her. "It's the only place that's safe. It's where the curse can't reach us." Samuel didn't question her. He had no time. All he could do was follow as she led him through the thick, twisting forest, the trees closing in around them. He could still hear the screams, still feel the presence of something watching, something waiting. And then, just as they reached the edge of the woods, a figure appeared, standing at the entrance to the town, bathed in the pale light of the full moon. The figure was tall, gaunt, and covered in tattered black robes. The wind seemed to swirl around it, carrying with it the scent of decay, the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, but its eyes, those glowing pits of darkness, locked onto Samuel's with a chilling, unblinking stare. "No," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Not now. Not here." The bone collector had found them. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the figure, the very embodiment of the nightmare he had tried to escape. The creature stood still, its form fading in and out of the fog like a shadow, like something not entirely of this world. "No escape," the woman muttered under her breath, her voice tinged with resignation. "It's coming for us." Samuel's knees buckled, his mind spinning. There was nowhere to run now, nowhere to hide. He could feel the pull, that horrible tug, as if the earth beneath him was demanding he return to the river, to its grasp. The bone collector took a step forward. The woman grabbed Samuel's arm, yanking him toward the old church just ahead. "Move!" she shouted, desperation in her voice. Samuel stumbled as they sprinted forward, but the creature was closing in behind them, its presence growing stronger with every step. They reached the church's door, its ancient wood creaking under the weight of their hurried arrival. The woman threw it open, dragging Samuel inside. As the door slammed shut behind them, the chilling presence of the bone collector seemed to dissipate, only for a moment. Inside the church, Samuel could still hear the whispers. "You belong to the river." The church door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and aged wood, a far cry from the fresh, heavy atmosphere of the forest they had just fled. His chest heaved with each breath, but the terror still gripped him. The bone collector was outside, its presence lingering like a shadow over their only sanctuary. "Is it safe here?" Samuel whispered, his voice shaking. His eyes darted to the woman, but she was already moving toward the altar, her hands trembling as she lit a few candles, casting flickering shadows across the room. "It will be for now," she said quietly, her back to him as she arranged the candles in a circle, forming a crude symbol on the floor. "But not for long. We don't have much time." Samuel's mind raced, the events of the last few hours crashing together in a nightmare of confusion. He had barely survived the riverbank, barely escaped the clutches of the bone collector, and now he was trapped in a place that was meant to offer salvation but felt as cold and foreboding as the woods outside. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What do you mean, not for long?" She turned to face him, her eyes dark with exhaustion. The faint glow of the candles reflected in her pupils, but there was something else in her gaze, something that told him she had seen far more than she ever wanted to. "The river holds more than just bones," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to echo through the centuries. "It holds memories, secrets. Those who are lost to it don't just disappear. They're kept." "Kept?" Samuel repeated, his mind struggling to grasp the meaning. "What are you talking about?" "The river is alive," she said, her voice cracking with the intensity of her words. "It's not just water. It's something much older than we can understand. It's a force that binds the souls of the lost, those who have been taken. Every full moon it calls to them, to the bone collector, to claim more. But it doesn't stop at just bones. It remembers them." Samuel stared at her, confusion and fear swirling inside him. He took a step closer, his eyes searching her face for some sign that she was making this up, that there was still some kind of hope to cling to. "What does it want from us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked down at the floor, her hands trembling as she traced the edges of the symbol she had created with the candles. "The bone collector is the guardian of the river. It is the keeper of the curse. It doesn't just collect the bones of the dead. It collects their souls. And once it marks you, there's no escaping. You belong to the river forever." She paused, her eyes distant as if remembering something too painful to say aloud. It's the curse of Black Hollow. It's been here for centuries, hidden beneath the town's forgotten history. No one remembers the original pact, but every month it takes more. And eventually, it comes for those who have been marked. Samuel's stomach twisted with the weight of her words. He couldn't breathe. I don't understand. How can I be marked? You were marked the moment you stepped into Black Hollow, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. The bone collector's presence is ancient. It doesn't need much to claim you, it only needs your fear. The moment you were afraid, it knew you were vulnerable. And now it's waiting. Samuel's mind was reeling. No escape, he couldn't fathom it. He couldn't even bring himself to process what she was saying. He wanted to scream, to tell her this couldn't be happening. But the weight of it all kept him silent. There was nothing left to say. The woman placed a hand on his arm, her grip firm but gentle. The only way to escape is to understand the river, she said, her voice low. You need to know what you're facing, or you'll never make it out. He looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of hope. How do we do that? The river's secret lies in the bones, she replied. Her voice steady but filled with something ancient, something sorrowful. The bones are the key. The bone collector arranges them, forming patterns. Those patterns are a map to the source of the curse. Samuel shook his head. A map? To where? To the heart of the river, she said, her eyes flickering with a mixture of dread and determination. The place where the pact was made. The place where the curse began. If you can find it, you can stop the cycle. You can break the curse. He swallowed hard, the weight of the task crashing down on him. He had no choice. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to escape, he had to face the river, face whatever was lurking in its depths. A scream broke through the silence, distant but unmistakable. A woman's voice, wailing in agony. Samuel's heart leaped into his throat, the terror crashing into him again. The woman beside him flinched at the sound, her face paling. They're coming, she whispered. It's already begun. The candles flickered wildly, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls of the church. The room felt colder, as if the very earth beneath them had grown more hostile. Samuel, the woman said, her voice firm but filled with an underlying desperation. You don't have much time. The bone collector won't stop. It never stops. He turned toward her, the weight of everything pressing down on him. There was no turning back now. There was only one path forward, the path to the river, the heart of the curse. As Samuel made his way toward the river, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The wind howled through the trees, but he didn't look back. The church behind him was silent now, the whispers of the river calling to him, pulling him forward. The bone collector would find him, but he had to stop it. He had to break the curse. Samuel stood at the edge of the church, the door creaking in the wind as the night around him grew heavier, darker, more suffocating. The whispers from the river were no longer distant. They were close now, echoing in his mind, tugging at him, like unseen fingers brushing the edges of his thoughts. His pulse raced, and his throat felt tight, as though the very air was choking him. What have I gotten myself into? The thought burned through him, but it was followed by a chilling realization. He didn't have a choice. The bone collector had already marked him. The curse had already started to weave its web around him, tightening with every passing second. The only way out was forward. To the river, he thought, his heart hammering with dread. The woman had told him about the bones, the map that would lead him to the heart of the curse. But even as he thought of it, a cold, paralyzing fear gripped his chest. He could feel it deep inside. The river. It was calling him, pulling him toward the very heart of the horror that had claimed this town. He had to do it. He had to stop it. But what if it was already too late? The woman's voice echoed in his memory, a steady, haunting tone. The bone collector won't stop. It never stops. It never stops. His breath hitched, his chest tightened, and for a moment he thought he might collapse. He felt the weight of her words settle on him like a boulder, the knowledge of how deep this curse went suffocating him. The bone collector didn't just take lives. It took souls. And once it had its claws in you, there was no escaping. A scream pierced the stillness of the night, raw and frantic, followed by another. Closer this time. It wasn't the woman's scream this time. It was someone else's. Someone in the woods. Someone just beyond his reach. Samuel's body tensed, his heart racing in his chest. His feet were moving before he even realized it. He was running into the heart of the darkness. His legs burned as he sprinted through the fog, each step like a drumbeat, a countdown. Don't stop. His mind screamed at him. Don't stop or you'll be next. The path ahead seemed endless, a winding, treacherous stretch of trees and shadows. The wind howled through the branches, the leaves rustling like whispers in the night. And then he heard it again. A soft, chilling growl, deeper this time, louder. His blood turned cold as the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. It's here. He glanced back over his shoulder, panic surging through his veins. The forest behind him was dark, impenetrable, but he could feel the presence. It was getting closer. He wasn't alone. No. His breath came in ragged gasps, the sound of his feet pounding the earth the only thing keeping him grounded. He stumbled forward, his mind screaming at him to move faster, but the weight of his fear seemed to pull at his every step, holding him back. And then he saw it. Through the thick, swirling mist, the river gleamed in the pale moonlight, its waters black as ink. It flowed sluggishly, but it felt alive and watching. The air around it was thick, heavy with something ancient, something dark. The whispers were louder now, clearer, as if they were right beside him. They're coming, they seemed to say over and over like a warning. A figure emerged from the fog ahead, tall and spectral, its outline wavering like smoke. Samuel froze, his heart leaping into his throat. The bone collector. It stepped toward him with a slow, deliberate pace, its glowing eyes locked onto his, piercing through the darkness like knives. The air seemed to crackle with its presence, a cold, palpable force that pressed in on him from all sides. His legs felt like lead, his chest constricting with fear. "Please, God," Samuel whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Please, I can't." The figure stopped just short of him, its form flickering like a shadow that couldn't fully manifest. Samuel's chest tightened, the panic clawing at his throat. He reached out instinctively, but his hand shook violently. This is it. This was what he had feared, the moment when the curse would claim him, the moment when he would become another soul lost to the river. He could already feel the weight of it, the pull, the inevitability of it. But then, something unexpected happened. The woman appeared from the shadows, her face pale but determined, her eyes wide with urgency. She stood between Samuel and the bone collector, her arms outstretched as if to protect him. The creature loomed over her, its hollow eyes glowing brighter, but she didn't flinch. "Get away from him," she hissed, her voice trembling with an unearthly power Samuel had never heard before. The bone collector took a step back, its form flickering, hesitant, as if the woman's presence was a force it couldn't touch. "You have no power here," she shouted, her voice growing louder, stronger. Samuel felt the strange pull of hope. What is she doing? The bone collector growled, low and menacing, but its presence faltered, fading slightly. It took another step back, but then it stopped, its eyes narrowing. "We can end this," the woman said, her voice calm now, as though she were speaking to a child. "This curse ends with you." Samuel's breath came in short, jagged bursts. End the curse? Was that even possible? The bone collector paused, and for a moment, everything stood still, frozen in place, as if time had stopped. Samuel didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move. And then, a deep, hollow voice filled the air. "You cannot break what is eternal." Samuel's body tensed, and the woman stepped forward, her face resolute. "We will see about that." The bone collector stood before them, towering like a nightmare made real, its eyes glowing like the very essence of darkness itself. The air was suffocating, Each breath Samuel took feeling heavier than the last. The river behind them gurgled and whispered, its murmur echoing through the fog, a constant reminder of the terror that haunted Black Hollow. The woman stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the creature, her hands clenched into fists. Samuel could barely breathe, his heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to move, wanted to do something to help, but his body refused to obey. The air crackled with power, a force that was too ancient and too powerful to fight with mere will. The bone collector's growl reverberated in the night, deep and rumbling, like the earth itself groaning under its weight. It stepped forward again, its presence overwhelming, and for the briefest moment, Samuel thought he might collapse under the weight of it. The creature's voice, hollow and void of life, echoed in his mind, a distorted whisper that curled around his thoughts. You cannot break what is eternal. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hands to the sky, her eyes closing as she muttered words that Samuel couldn't understand. The air around her seemed to shift, becoming colder, darker. The whispers from the river grew louder, more urgent, as though the very earth was trying to stop her. But she pressed on, her voice rising in defiance. This land is no longer yours. You do not own these souls. The bone collector recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a terrible shriek that pierced the night, a sound so primal, so filled with rage, that it sent a wave of nausea crashing over Samuel. He stumbled back, his hand gripping the woman's arm for support. The woman's grip tightened on her torch, and she stepped forward, her voice gaining strength. The curse ends here. You will not claim another soul. The bone collector howled again, its limbs twisting unnaturally, its body morphing as though it were made of shadows and mist. It seemed to swell in size, its form becoming monstrous, towering over them like a dark storm ready to devour everything in its path. Samuel's heart raced as he watched the woman, her expression resolute. He didn't understand what she was doing, but he knew one thing. This was the moment that could either save them or destroy them. The creature lunged forward, its massive form surging toward them with terrifying speed. Samuel barely had time to react before the woman threw her arms out in front of her, a surge of light erupting from her hands. A blinding flash tore through the night, illuminating the entire riverbank in a searing white light. The bone collector screamed in agony, its form disintegrating under the light. Samuel watched, wide-eyed, as the creature writhed in the air, its body unraveling like threads of shadow. For a moment, everything was still, as though time itself had frozen. And then, with a final, bone-chilling screech, the bone collector collapsed to the ground, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The river, once thick with its presence, grew quiet, eerily so. The whispers faded, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted, leaving nothing but an uneasy silence. Samuel stared in disbelief. Had they won? Had they truly broken the curse? But before he could speak, the woman collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Her face was pale, and her body trembled with exhaustion, as though the very act of confronting the creature had drained her life force. Samuel rushed to her side, his hand on her shoulder as he knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with worry. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both relief and sorrow. "It's done," she whispered. "For now, the curse is broken." Samuel's breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words sank in. They had done it. They had stopped the bone collector. The curse that had haunted Black Hollow for centuries had finally been broken. But as the fog began to lift and the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished. The river, though quiet, still seemed to watch them. The earth still seemed to hum with a faint energy, as if the land itself was waiting for something. And then, a faint whisper brushed against his ear, so soft he almost missed it. "You cannot escape." He turned sharply, his heart racing again. But the woman's hand on his arm stopped him. She met his gaze, her eyes dark with understanding. "It's not over," she said softly. "The bone collector is gone, but the land, The hollow itself, it will never forget. Samuel didn't know what to say. The weight of her words lingered in the air, thick with the knowledge that Black Hollow's secrets ran deeper than either of them could comprehend. As they stood there, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees, Samuel couldn't shake the sense that the hollow was still watching them. And though the bone collector had been defeated, he knew that Black Hollow's curse was far from over. For in the distance, beyond the trees and the river, something else stirred in the mist. A shadow watching, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. The cycle, he knew, would start again, and Black Hollow would never truly be free.